اعوذ بالله من الشیطان الرجیم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحیم و به نستعین انه خیر ناصر و معین. همچنان بحث طرح‌ریزی استراتژیک رو دنبال می‌کنیم. مستر پلن مورد نظرمون همون بحث سازوکاری است که برای نظام تعلیم و تربیت در نظر گرفته بودیم. ما یک طرح استراتژیک پویا رو برای مجموعه حکومت در دست تهیه داریم، براشون ارائه می‌کنیم. لازم هست که ابعادی از اون رو دوستان باهاش آشنا بشن. یک نکات مختصری رو توی جلسات گذشته بهش پرداختیم. طرح‌های استراتژیکی که تهیه میشه در کشور و در سطح جهان عمدتاً طرح‌های ایستاست. به ندرت نمونه طرح پویا مشاهده میشه. از اونجایی که این اولین طرح استراتژیک پویا و در واقع داینامیک استراتژیک پلنینگ هست که به طور جدی انجام میشه، ضرورت داره که حالا دوستان با ابعادی از اون آشنا بشن و با چگونگی طرح‌ریزی این گونه طرح‌ها از نزدیک مواجه بشن تا نکات آموزنده‌ای رو هم در محتوا هم در خود روش طرح‌ریزی بهش برسن. لذا من یک بار دیگه از پایه این طرح با تغییرات بنیادینی که داشته بحث رو ادامه میدم که با ملاحظاتی از اون بیشتر آشنا بشم. امروز مشکلاتی که اقتصاد جهانی و اقتصاد به خصوص ایالات متحده و غرب پیدا کرده، حتی با یک معضلی که به فروپاشی تمدنی هم داره نزدیک میشه و اگه نتونن جمع کنن این مسئله رو قطعاً به یک فاجعه گسترده جهانی تبدیل خواهد شد. اگه نتونن جمع کنن، باز میبینید که طرح‌هایی که ارائه میشه کاملا استاتیک و ایستاست. یعنی تخصیص مثلا صدها میلیارد دلار تزریق به بخش‌های بیمه و نظام مالی و بانکی ایالات متحده یا اخیراً اتحادیه اروپا، پایین یا بالا بردن نرخ بهره و نکاتی از این دست، اینها هیچ کدوم گزاره‌های طرح پویا محسوب نمیشه در نوع طرح‌ریزی. لذا شما میبینید خود مجامعی که به صورت پایه با این تفکرات آشنا هستن از نوع توانایی طرح‌ریزی دینامیک عاجزن. این دیگه وقتی به محصول یعنی به حوزه انسانشناسی میرسه، نوع طرح‌ریزی استراتژیک که مربوط به مناسبات انسانیه در ملاحظات جامعه شناختی و روان شناختی، کار رو پیچیده تر میکنه. تقریبا امروز بشر عاجزه با این سرعت تحولاتی که داره رخ میده در جهان از نظر تکنولوژیک، علمی و غیره که بتونه در انسانسازی طرح‌های پویا تهیه کنه. ورود جمهوری اسلامی به این حوزه و اینکه مدعی انسانسازی بشه و بخواد فارغ از روش‌های شناخته شده جهانی امروز در نظام تعلیم و تربیت دست به ساخت و پرداخت انسان بزنه، انسان منتظر خودآگاه، این حتما نوع طرح‌ریزی استراتژیکش طبیعتاً باید پویا باشه. اشاره کردم که محصول پویایی است. انسانی که در 5-6 سالگی در مهد کودک تحویل مجموعه نظام تربیتی میشه و وقتی دیپلم میگیره یک جوان 17-18 ساله است و وقتی وارد دانشگاه میشه تا فارغ التحصیل بشه 10 سال بعد آرام آرام دوره جوانیش تمام میشه، این محصول پویاست. این محصول یک روز یه چیزی بوده، اگر تو همون مدرسه و دانشگاه دست بهش نزنید خودش همینجوری از نظر سنی و جنسی داره یک دگردیسی درش صورت میگیره، چه برسه به این که بخواید تربیتش کنید و تعدیبش کنید. در این 17-18 سال جامعه اون هم تغییر میکنه، یعنی بستر رشد اون هم خودش دچار دگردیسی میشه. به این معنا دغدغه ما انسانه. مشکلاتی که امروز برای بشریت پدید آمده نه صرف اقتصاد و امنیت و سیاست و مسائلی از این دست، بلکه عدم شناخت انسان. لذا در گام اول برمیگردیم به خود انسان، ببینیم نسبتمون با انسان توی طرح‌ریزی پویا، طرح‌ریزی استراتژیک پویا از کجا تعریف میشه. غربی ها برای کلمه انسان در مدرنیته مفهومی دارن به نام آنتروپوس، در یونانی همین است که میگن آنتروپولوژی، که اینجا به غلط ترجمه شده به انسان شناسی. در آنتروپولوژی و آنتروپوس ما برای طرح‌ریزی همواره اشاره کردم که فلسفه اون حوزه رو بررسی میکنیم، به ایدئولوژی مربوطه میرسیم و از ایدئولوژی به موازاتش و همترازش دکترین مربوطه رو باید در نظر بگیریم. غربی ها در فلسفه آنتروپوس، فیلاسوفی آف آنتروپولوژی، نگاهی که به انسان دارن با همون تعریفی که از فلسفه داشتیم. فلسفه پرسش از چیستی پدیده هاست، اینکه پدیده ها چیزی هستن، ماده اولیه‌شون چیست. در مواجهه با انسان هم از ماده اولیه انسان میپرسه آنتروپولوژی. به تبع چنین نگاهی ایدئولوژی حاکم بر غرب، به ویژه اونجایی که مکاتب اصلی تربیتی شکل میگیره، دو دسته مکتب رو برمیتابن. یعنی دو نوع نگاه، دو ایدئولوژی به انسان وجود داره. ایدئولوژی اول انسان رو مخلوق میدونه. این نگاه برگرفته از کتب عهد عتیق و عهد جدیده، یعنی تورات و انجیل. همین تلقی که نزدیک به این تلقی که ما در قرآن داریم، که انسان یک روزی توسط خدا خلق شده، در طرح نفخه از روح خودش در این انسان دمیده و این انسان شکل گرفته. حالا این که چه موقع بوده، چه دوره طول کشیده، شکل و سازوکار تعامل مادی خلقت با این بعد معنوی چطور بوده، درش تردیدهایی وجود داره. متاسفانه کسی هم زیاد تو این زمینه کار نکرده. یکی از میدانهای تحقیقاتی جدی که لازم نسل شما بهش بپردازه، این میدانه که بعضی عمرشون رو بگذارن مشخص کنن در این رشد مادی سیر تکوین عالم مادی و طبیعت اون نگاه به خلقت چه نسبتی داره. غربی‌ها تو این حوزه وارد شدن، مسیحی‌ها. اما دست حوزه های فکری در جامعه ما خالیه. یعنی بین اینکه یک روزی خدا انسان رو خلق کرد و از روح خودش در اون دمید، با این رشد علمی که امروز میبینید که از مثلا نظریه بیگ بنگ شروع میکنن و در اثر یک انفجار گسترده عالم شکل میگیره، عالم مادی، همچنان در حال گسترش هزاران کهکشان موضوعیت داره شکل گرفته. تو کهکشان راه شیری یک منظومه کوچیکی است به نام منظومه شمسی و یک کره سیاره‌ای به نام زمین، و این زمین هزاران و میلیون ها سال طول کشیده تا به اینجا رسیده و چطور جانوران شکل گرفتن و بعد انسان در پهنه این حوزه زیستی کی و در چه موقعی به وجود اومده، به اینجا رسیده. نسبت بین این دوتا مطلب دست دانشگاهی های ما و حوزوی های ما خالیه. یعنی نیاز به این داره که بعضی این میدون ها رو در بنوردن و واردش بشن و عمرشون رو بگذارن تحقیق کنن، این موارد رو روشن کنن. نگاه به انسان از پایه مخدوش، یعنی همینطوری که امروز ابعادش رو روشن میکنیم واقعا کسی نمیدونه که مبنا و مبدأ کجاست. به موازات این مسئله که نگاه بیبلی ها هست، نگاه اونایی که به کتاب مقدس و عهد عتیق و عهد جدید یعنی تورات و انجیل توجه دارن، تو این فضا یک نگاه دیگه هم که بیش از 100 ساله در جهان رایج شده و میشناسید و شنیدید و قطعا در مقاطع تحصیلی مدارس و دانشگاهی خودتون اون رو خوندید، به موازات اون مطرحه. نگاه خلقتگرا که خلقت انسان رو معلول نظم آفرینش متأثر از خدا میدونه. خدایی وجود داره، یک بهشتی هست، یک کره زمینی و روند تکوینی. نگاه خلقتگرا در مقابل خودش یک تلقی رو برتافت به نام داروینیسم. فرضیه اِوولوشن یا اون چیزی که داروین انسان رو یک حیوان در حال تکامل دید، که انسان رو یک قورباغه دیدن که از لجن شکل گرفت، آرام آرام تکمیل شد یک قورباغه آمد تبدیل شد به یک میمون انسان نما، بعد آرام آرام انسان نئاندرتال و به مرور جلو اومد تا به همین انسان امروزی رسید. این تلقی یا تلقی های دیگه‌ای که در فرضیه اِوولوشن مطرح بود. حالا اینجا کلمه اِوولوشن به تحول یا به تکامل ترجمه شده که معنی رسایی نیست. بعضی از مفاهیم رو به همون زبان اصلی خودش سعی کنید بشناسید. در هر صورت صرف یک فرضیه علمی در داروینیسم نیست که تا اینجا آمده بگیم خب بله خلقت بود، مسئله جنبش هم بود، حالا یک کسی هم آمد یک حرف این چنینی زد. واقعیت مسئله اینه که ارکان تعلیم و تربیت و ایژوکیشن توی غرب و همه جهان نظریه داروین. بالای 2600 رشته علمی شناخته شده امروز بر پایه داروینیسم، ایدئولوژی داروین داره شکل میگیره. عنایت ویژه به این مسئله داشته باشید که اگر شما در سیاست و علوم سیاسی تحصیل میکنید، علم سیاست پایه در داروینیسم داره. اگر اقتصاد رو مطالعه میکنید، اگر روانشناسی رو رشته خودتون انتخاب کردید، اگر شما جامعه شناس هستید، اگر حوزه تخصصیتون فلسفه هست، نگاه به انسان یک نگاه داروینیستیه. مصیبت بشر از اینجا شروع میشه که از منشأ خودش بریده، نمیدونه از کجا آمده، اینجا چه کار میکنه، به کجا میخواد بره. داروینیسم به قدری دامنش گسترده است که تأثیری که بر تمام رشته‌های علمی گذاشته، از پزشکی گرفته تا حوزه صنعت، همه علوم انسانی و همه علوم پایه، به مرور به نتایجی رسیده که امروز در خود غرب محل نزاعه. اگه خوب به خاطر داشته باشید چند ماه قبل که مستند جنگجویان خدا رو که 3 قسمتی بود CNN تهیه کرده بود، قسمت اولش مربوط به جنگجویان یهودی خدا بود که امروز در کره زمین کسانی هستن خودشون رو جنگجویان خدا میدونن. قسمت دوم 1.5 ساعت بود که شب دوم پخش کرده بود CNN، سربازان و جنگجویان مسیحی خدا که اونجلیست ها و همین جریانی که امروز در ایالات متحده خیلی مدعی تلقی های دینی هستن، اونها رو شامل میشد. و در 1.5 ساعت سوم که شب سوم پخش شده بود توسط CNN، به جنگجویان مسلمان خدا پرداخته شده بود. اونجا در بخش مسیحی در درون خاک آمریکا با خانواده ها وقتی بحث میشد، خانواده‌ای بودن که بچه هاشون رو توی آمریکا مدرسه نمیفرستادن، یعنی توی خونه 5 تا 6 تا بچه رو خودشون درس میدادن. وقتی میپرسید اون خبرنگار که چرا شما بچه هاتون رو نمیفرستید مدرسه، میگفتن اینها توی مدارس داروینیزم رو مبنای تربیت قرار میدن.
From Washington State to Washington, D.C., we have met people who believe their faith compels them to change American culture and politics. But there are also people who are fighting in a very different way, by turning inwards.
Yes. 5 times 1 is 5. 3 times 0 is 0.
It's a familiar scene.
5 times 10 is 50.
But they aren't doing homework.
Where do you start for your little A?
This is school, and their mother is the teacher.
You have an eraser. Here you go.
Jennifer Navarre and her husband Mike are quiet warriors against a culture they feel is dangerous for their children. They're fighting back by opting out, teaching their children at home because for them, public schools are faithless and morally bankrupt.
Most of the schools are secular in their thought, in the direction, very humanistic, and those are things that we wouldn't want to raise our children under.
What is it about the sort of public sphere that you don't want to expose your children to?
Well, it's more what we want to expose them to here. What they wouldn't get there is what we want to teach them here, and that would be a Christian worldview.
Mike runs a landscaping business and is also a part-time preacher at a small local church. Jennifer stays at home and is the primary teacher of their 5 children. 9-year-old Lucas, 7-year-old Eden, 5-year-old Trinity, 3-year-old Aria, and 1-year-old Daniel. And they say, God willing, they'll have more. Jennifer's days are hectic.
All right, you want your drink? With me.
Especially with 2 toddlers running around. But whether she's being a mother or a teacher,
All right, let me see you do your E.
the focus remains strictly on God.
What happened to her?
What happened? God put them out of the garden because they did not obey, right?
The homeschool movement has been growing since the 1980s. An estimated 2 million children are taught at home, many for purely religious reasons. It's become a billion-dollar industry. Books, magazines, and internet resources designed to help homeschooling parents.
We don't just do math because you need to know math so that you can go to college and get a job. We study math because God created math and God loves math.
Do you like being homeschooled?
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever feel a bit different?
No, not at all.
What do you learn here at home?
I learn math, science, geography, history, and Latin.
And science, specifically Darwin's theory of evolution, is a battleground for many conservative Christian parents. It's not in the Bible, and so they think it's wrong. What will you teach your children about science, about where we all came from?
We'll teach them the truth, that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and we will certainly teach them about evolution, about the theory or hypothesis of evolution.
The hypothesis?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's an unproven hypothesis. I think that's safe to say.
Will you tell them it's wrong?
You know, yes, we will.
How can you be so sure?
Well, because the Word of God is truth.
53%, that's more than half of all Americans, believe in creationism, that God created the earth and everything on it, as it says in the book of Genesis. 1/3 of Americans feel so strongly about it, they want to banish evolution from the classroom and replace it with creationism. I spoke with religious historian Karen Armstrong about why feelings on evolution run so strongly in America. What do you think accounts for more than half of America believing in creationism?
Once you say that the first chapter of Genesis is not literally, historically, and scientifically true, then the whole Bible becomes a nonsense. So Darwinism became, it was no longer just a scientific hypothesis. It became a symbol of everything that was wrong with the modern world.
God's warriors have fought the teaching of evolution in the schools and in the courts many times over the years. The most notable recent case was in Dover, Pennsylvania. The fight was over the theory of intelligent design, which maintains the universe is so complex there has to be a master architect. The Dover School Board said it could be taught, but opponents charged it was just creationism in disguise.
Intelligent design and religiously motivated attacks on evolution have no place in our public school science classrooms.
And in December 2005, a judge agreed. Eugenie Scott directs the National Center for Science Education.
What the Dover decision did was discourage other school districts from passing policies like Dover, where teachers would be required to bring intelligent design into the curriculum.
But Scott, who monitors the creationist movement, says the Dover decision still hasn't stopped the controversy from reaching into the classroom.
There are some teachers, I'm told, who just routinely skip evolution. But it's the perception that evolution is very controversial that makes a lot of teachers just not want to teach it.
At the Navarre's house,
All right, Eden.
the lessons continue.
Okay, and what time is it now?
An education grounded in God, a protective shield against what they believe to be a hostile, secular world that can harm their children.
You know, honestly, we like to be able to control what they're exposed to. I don't know that it's healthy for a child who hasn't developed a framework of understanding to be exposed to a whole myriad of ideas.
What do you think he wants for you, God?
I think he wants me to be homeschooled.
Whatever God calls him to do, I want him to do it with integrity and with honor and do his job well. So at the end of the day, he can stand before the Lord and say, you know, I use my time and my talent and my treasure and I use it all for your glory today.
And what do you think he wants for your life?
To be a preacher like Daddy.
ببینید یک خانواده مسیحی که به خلقت معتقده نه به اِوولوشن، این بچه خودش رو در جامعه مثل آمریکا نمیفرسته مدرسه، توی خونه بچهش رو آموزش میده. اما هیچ کس در جمهوری اسلامی نمیداند که اساس تعلیم و تربیت در جمهوری اسلامی امروز کاملا مبتنی بر داروینیسم. هیچ کس نمیداند که اساس رشته روانشناسی، جامعه شناسی، علوم سیاسی، اقتصاد، علوم ارتباطات و مواردی از این دست در ایران داروینیسمه. هیچ کس نمیداند که وقتی اندیشه فروید رو، اندیشه جان دیوئی رو، ویلیام جیمز رو، ژان پیاژه و دیگران رو در علوم تعلیم و تربیت و در روانشناسی مبنا قرار میدیم، اون نگاه به انسان یک نگاه آنتروپولوژیکاله و اون آنتروپولوژی ایدئولوژی که ازش متساعد شده داروینیزمه. بین نگاه فروید با نگاه داروین اختلاف خاصی وجود نداره. بین نگاه آدام اسمیت در اقتصاد با داروینیسم هیچ تقابل و تضادی وجود، اینا با هم جمع میشه. بین نگاه هابز در فلسفه سیاست با داروینیسم هیچ اختلافی وجود نداره. یعنی اینها رشته هاشون کاملا با هم متوازنه. شما یک سری به کتاب‌های روانپزشکی بزنید که توی دانشگاه‌های ما تدریس میشه، حتما به عنوان یک کیس مطالعاتی این کتاب 3 جلدی کاپلان و سادوک رو که الان در همه دانشجوهای پزشکی ما مجبورن اونو بخونن، 3 جلدی بزرگی هم هست، هر سال هم تجدید چاپ میشه. به مناسبات جنسی که رسیده میشه، حالا در بحث فلسفه سکس بهش اشاره میکنیم، تعریفی که از انسان در مناسبات جنسی در کتاب کاپلان و سادوک در روانپزشکی داده میشه، اون تعریف و اون مناسبات رو با مسائل فقهی و شرعی تطبیق بدید. یعنی واقعا یک کسی که به خصوص رشتهش پزشکی باشه، اندکی هم با فقه آشنا باشه، کتاب کاپلان و سادوک رو ده تطبیق کنه با مبانی شرعی. ببینید هیچ نقطه اشتراکی پیدا نمی کنید. اما وقتی مثلا در اندیشه فروید در همین کتاب کاپلان و سادوک دانشجوی روانپزشکی، دانشجوی روانشناسی و دانشجوی روانپزشکی و دانشجوی پزشکی ما میخونه که همجنس بازی بیماری نیست، از قول فروید میخونه، رسما تو این کتاب اومده. انحراف جنسی هم نیست، اصلا مسئله ای نیست. بعد این رو مقایسه میکنه با اینکه گناه کبیره است چنین مقوله‌ای در مناسبات انسانی، و بعد مقایسه میکنه با اون چیزایی که در تاریخ انبیا آمده در شهر صدوم. ممکنه بگید چطور ممکنه توی جمهوری اسلامی مثلا رشته های علمی ما داروینیستی باشن، نگاهشون به انسان یک نگاه طبیعت گرایانه باشه، ولی کسانی اینجا متوجه نشده باشن؟ چون حوزه ساینسه. بین ساینس و گزاره های دینی اینا عموما میان برتری رو میدن به ساینس، به اون چیزی که دانشه. لذا کافیست شما فقط کتاب 3 جلدی کاپلان و سادوک رو تطبیق کنید با مبانی شرعی و دینی، ببینید که کفر، شرک، فسق، فجور، فتنه رسما به عنوان ساینس، به عنوان دانش تدریس میشه توسط استادان دانشگاه. تکست و متن درسی توسط وزارت علوم و وزارت بهداشت مبنا قرار گرفته، رسمیت داره. اون نگاه به انسان به عنوان نگاه علمی ترویج میشه. هیچ کس هم اعتراضی نمیکنه، چون کسی حرف جدیدی تولید نکرده، کسی تطبیق نکرده. وقتی اندیشه فروید که همجنسگرایی در مردان و در زنان نه انحراف، نه بیماریه و هیچ مسئله دیگه ای نیست و توصیه میشه به این که با این مسئله برخورد سلبی نکنید، گناه آلود نگاه نکنید، بیش از 10 تا 15 مورد از گناهان کبیره رو شما در دانش روانشناسی امروز میبینید که ازش قبح زدایی میکنن، قباحتش رو علمی، این البته علم نیستا، به خیال خودشون علمی در ذهن افراد میشکنن. اگر قرار این انحرافاش مواجهه علمی صورت بگیره، از پایه باید ببینیم چرا این بلا سر غرب آمده. لذا بنیانهای تربیتی بشر بنیانهای غلطی است. چرا؟ چون بر آنتروپولوژی یعنی اینکه انسان چیست. کسی نمیپرسه انسان کیست، انسان چیست. در این چیستی انسان پرسش اصلی منتج میشه به اینکه انسان آیا مخلوق است در نگاه کتب عهد عتیق و عهد جدید، یا انسان تصادفی اتفاقی در اثر این تعاملاتی که نوترون ها و پروتون ها و غیر و ذالک داشتن پدید آمده. همین تحقیقاتی که اخیراً چند روز قبل توی با هزینه‌های بسیار سنگین توی اروپا صورت گرفت، یک تیمی هم از ایران شرکت کرده بودن. چه انرژی گسترده‌ای گذاشته میشه. ما که مخالف این که از طریق ذرات این بررسی ها صورت بگیره نیستیم. حالا درست در یک چنین شرایطی مسئله ما مسئله تربیت انسان میشه. اگر قرار شد روی تربیت انسان بحث جدی کنیم، اول باید ببینیم تمام این 2600 رشته علمی از چه بنیانی آغاز میکنه و به خصوص در 120 سال گذشته چه مبنایی رو انتخاب کرده. مبناشون نگاه آقای داروینه. ما تحقیقات عمده‌ای که توی این زمینه داشتیم در طول سالهای گذشته هم رسانه‌های خود اینها رو مانیتورینگ کردیم. تقابلی که هر از چندی بین مذهبیون جامعه آمریکا با طرفداران نظریه داروین وجود داره، نظریه حاکم بر این جامعه. اگر شما به وبسایت‌های مربوطه هم مراجعه کنید در اینترنت، اینکه مرکز اصلی سیاستگذاری علمی در آمریکا خلقت رو غیر علمی میدونن. یعنی هر چی در مورد خلقت گفته شده غیر علمی و غیر منطقی، یک جور وهم تلقی شده و اون چیزی که علمی پذیرفته شده نظریه داروین و بس. در مستر پلنی که برای نظام تعلیم و تربیت، نظام تأدیب تبیین کردیم، ما حدود 50 تا از رودمپ ها و نقشه های راه رو تو این زمینه بررسی کردیم. حدود 50 تا فلسفه اونا رو و نزدیک 50 تا حکمت قرآنی رو ما به ازای اون. در ارزیابی که در این حوزه صورت میگیره، شما خودتون متوجه بشید آیا رشته‌های ما به ازاش قابل بقا هستن یا نه. برای این منظور یک ارزیابی دقیقی غربی رو انجام دادن، کار خیلی جدی رو صورت دادن، فیلمی ساختن که 7 تا قسمت روند تکامل و نظریه فرضیه تکامل و تأثیرش بر عالم امروز رو بررسی کردن.
No, thank you. No, 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 no.
Esto aquí, venga, quiere un poquito. ¿Qué quiere?
Me.
¿Quiere un poquito de agua?
Me, in amo Charles Darwin.
Sí,
Yeah.
sí, sí.
Captain Fitzroy.
Sí, sí,
Me
sí.
soy naturalista. Hueso.
Hueso,
Bones,
huesos.
bones.
Sí, hueso, hueso.
Yes, see,
Sí.
hueso gigante. Gigante.
Sí, sí,
Aquí,
sí,
here.
sí, señor, pues aquí están los huesos. Aquí están.
Fitzroy.
A flood washed down part of a bank of earth.
Mi hijo le pegó con una piedra y le sacó los dientes. Por eso que se caí tan afuera.
It was perfect, but the boys knocked out some of the teeth throwing stones at it.
How much?
Hijo,
¿Cuánto
¿cuánto
costa?
dice? ¿Qué quiere? Un rifle, señor, un rifle.
I wonder why these creatures no longer exist.
Perhaps the ark was too small to allow them entry and they perished in the flood. What is there to laugh at?
Oh, nothing. Nothing.
Do you mock me or the Bible?
Oh, neither.
What sort of clergyman will you be, Mr. Darwin?
Dreadful. Dreadful.
And God said, let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life, and fowl that may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. And God created great whales, and every living creature that moveth.
Hello.
Which the waters brought forth.
What are you doing here?
After their kind.
Why such beauty when no one can see?
And every winged fowl after his kind.
You can't have been blown here.
And God saw that it was good.
If I were to give a prize for the single best idea anybody ever had, I'd give it to Darwin for the idea of natural selection. Ahead of Newton, ahead of Einstein, because his idea unites the two most disparate features of our universe. The world of purposeless, meaningless matter and motion on the one side, and the world of meaning and purpose and design on the other. He understood that what he was proposing was a truly revolutionary idea.
The Darwinian Revolution is about who we are. It's what we're made of. It's what our life means insofar as science can answer that question. So it, in many ways, was the singularly deepest and most discombobulating of all discoveries that science has ever made.
In Darwin's day, the idea of evolution was regarded as highly unorthodox because it went against all of natural history in Great Britain. It jeopardized the standing of science. It did jeopardize the standing of a stable society, the Bible, and the church as well. Darwin kept his thoughts to himself for many years and agonized over the problem. If it ever got out that he was doing something that ran slap counter to established science, would ruin his career, ruin his reputation. He was a respectable man with a dangerous theory.
The earthquake ran for 400 miles along the coast, accompanied by the simultaneous eruption of a line of volcanoes. We found fresh mussel beds lying above high tide. The shellfish all dead. The land had risen 8 feet. Mountains must be the product of thousands and thousands of such rises occurring again and again throughout history. Even at the very crest of the Andes, we found marine remains. The fossilized shells of creatures that once crawled about at the bottom of the sea, elevated nearly 14,000 feet above its level. Time, unimaginable tracts of time, is the key.
I'd rather thought later we might see Darwin. Splendid. Thank you. Well done.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations. Interesting paper.
Oh, thank you.
Where have you placed your fossil specimens?
Well, I was thinking of the British Museum.
Ah, you're happy to have them languish in some dusty Bloomsbury cellar?
No, not at all.
You'd better let me look over them for you, then.
We'll let you know.
Thank you.
Tom, as though Who does he think he is?
He thinks he's Richard Owen, the most brilliant anatomist in
And
Europe.
you're Erasmus Darwin's little brother, Darwin of the Beagle Darwin. Laud it while you can.
I don't want to laud it.
Liar.
What a brilliant red. Brighter than the actual plumage.
I try to allow for the loss of colour that comes with death.
And can you do this with my Galapagos birds?
Well, I haven't finished identifying them yet, Mr. Darwin. I do know that your wren is a finch, your grosbeak is a finch, even your blackbird is a finch, and they're unique, all new, never described before. There's even evidence that there are separate species for each Galapagos island.
But I didn't label mine by island.
You didn't label them by island.
Why do you want them? Well, I told you. I failed to label mine by island.
No, I mean, why are the birds I collected suddenly of such interest?
خط ثابتی که می‌بینید داره دنبال میشه خط تاریخ طبیعیه، یعنی اشاره به زلزله، سنگ‌های آتشفشانی، به جانورشناسی موجودات مختلف. خط ثابتی که توی قرن 18 و 19 خیلی برجسته شد تاریخ طبیعی و تاریخ طبیعت بود. لذا سیطره ایدئولوژی نیچرالیزم و ناتورالیزمه، یعنی اصالت توی این روندی که الان می‌بینید مربوط به طبیعت و هر چیز طبیعی است. دوره‌ایه که دیگه تاریخ طبیعی میاد جای تاریخ ایده و ذهن رو میگیره، یعنی عصر بعد از هگل. در هگل تاریخ به ایده برمیگشت، ذهن عام تاریخی هگلی تاریخ ایده ها بود. اون ایدئالیسمی که توی فلسفه هگلی شکل میگیره دوره بعد از هگل، یعنی 30 سال بعد که آرام آرام داروین شروع میکنه این فعالیت رو، تاریخ میشه تاریخ طبیعت، یعنی هر چیز طبیعی. اینجا یا زمینه و اجزای زمین شناختی یا جانورانن، یعنی پرنده ها و آبزیان و موجودات دیگه، یا گیاهانن. روندی که الان مبناست، یعنی شیفتی که کارگردان کرده تو مقاطع مختلف زندگی داروین از زمین شناسی به جانور شناسی به غیره، داره روند تکوین تاریخ طبیعی رو شکلش رو مشخص میکنه. نظریه حاکم بر تاریخ امروز هم تاریخ طبیعیه و انسان و عالم یک پدیده طبیعی، نه دیگه ایدئالیسم هگلی مبناست، نه نظریه های ما قبل اون.
Discovered by Mr. Darwin at Punta Alta. Lastly,
The remains of Mr. Darwin's breakfast.
this skull belongs to a huge rodent, a relative of the South American capybara.
If that's the size of a rat, imagine how big the cats must have been.
I have named it Toxodon.
Thank you, Professor Owen, for identifying and describing the extraordinary array of fossils discovered by Mr. Darwin on his voyage to South America.
We allow the planets and the sun to be governed by natural laws. But the smallest insect we wish to be created by a special act of God. Surely the creation of life has to be explained in the same way as geology, using natural, ordinary, everyday causes.
Well, in theory, yes, but in practice there can be no question about the prime cause. Divine will.
Shouldn't men of science be free to investigate each and every means by which new species come into being?
If by that you mean wild accusations about man's ancestry, the answer is no. To destroy man's unique status is to open the floodgates to anarchy. You might just as well throw muskets to the rabble.
People like Owen think that if there was no Church of England, cucumbers wouldn't grow.
If the globe has undergone such profound changes in its history, geologically, then surely all living creatures must have changed with it to adapt to their new conditions. Otherwise, they would have perished.
Some did perish, it seems.
Yes, but the continued existence of life on Earth can only be explained by the assumption that a creature like this was replaced by the modern-day armadillo. There must be a law which causes new species to appear in place of the extinct ones.
That, my boy, is the mystery of mysteries. The person who can solve that riddle will take all of the scientific prizes.
It's the variety of their beaks that's so amazing. They graduate perfectly in size. From this large parrot-like beak, similar to a hawfinch, perfectly designed for cracking nuts, to this tiny warbler finch, fine as a chaffinch, to feed on insects.
And they're all descended from this one. The common ground finch.
I've started to prepare some colour plates.
Now put my words to shame. Raz! Raz? Oh. Raz! Wake up!
What time is it?
Lunchtime.
Oh, well then go away and come back at tea time.
The Galapagos Islands are almost identical. The same geology, the same climate.
I'm glad to hear it. Now go away.
So why should different finches inhabit identical islands? Raz? Small changes over ages and ages can throw up mountain ranges and sink continents. If mountains can move and rivers can move, then why can't animals? Finches, tortoises, iguanas. If you trace animals across the surface of the earth, or dig down and trace them back through time, you come face to face with the same truth.
Which is?
New beings can appear on the earth. Perhaps everything is part of one ancestral chain. Man, mouse, armadillo. No. It's nonsense to think of animals or man as climbing some ladder. To talk of one animal being higher than another. No. No. I think it's more like a tree. A tree of life. Each new species springs from the parent tree like a shoot. These shoots branch and divide in their turn, and so on and so on. Some branches die out, others keep developing. The trunk, the ancient common ancestor. The stock from which all animals and plants sprang.
Nursed by warm sunbeams in primeval caves, organic life began beneath the waves. Hence, without parent, by spontaneous birth, rise the first steps of animated earth. Grandfather Zoonomia.
اشارت به همون بنیان نظریه داروین یک درختواره ترسیم کرده که بعد توی قسمت بعد بهش اشاره میکنه. در درختواره نگاه داروین موجودات از یک ریشه خاصی نشأت میگیرن، بعد شاخ و برگ پیدا میکنن. شبیه تقریبا اون چیزی که در درخت فلسفه بهش اشاره کردیم از قول رونه دکارت. اشاره‌ای که بود به این که نردبانی نمیشه دید، یعنی مدرج نمیشه کرد این وضعیت رو که بگیم جانوران تو چه درجه هایی از تکامل قرار دارن، بلکه تکامل موجودات یک درختواره داره. در فرضیه داروین اون درخته جایگاه بسیار بسیار حساسی داره.
You just can't help but be awestruck by the fact that there are so many different kinds of things here. There are 12 species of primates. There are 550 species of birds that have been identified here. There are 100 species of frogs right here in this little area. Wow, that's great. It's fascinating. Why is there such diversity here? We got plenty of stuff. Oh, we got some good stuff. We got a mind blower or two.
Yeah.
Did you? Yeah.
Let me show you this one.
Ornithologist Tom Smith wants to compare the size of birds' beaks from the rainforest with those he hopes to find in the mountains. Even subtle differences may offer clues about how and why new species arise. Just as it was the beaks of finches from the nearby Galapagos Islands that spurred Darwin's thinking in the 1830s. Darwin saw that the finches he brought back had uniquely shaped beaks, adapted to the different foods on the islands. He envisioned that these different species of finch had all descended, with modifications, from a common ancestral population that had flown over from the mainland. Darwin's bold insight was to apply this vision to all of life. To see that the great variety of life on Earth, leopards and lichens, minnows and whales, flowering plants and flatworms, apes and human beings, all descended from one root.
این همون درخت طبیعیه که البته بخش فقط حیواناتشه. این درخت رو در موارد مختلف داروین تقسیم کرده.
Of common ancestry to everything that lived on this planet, including us. You could construe it in other ways that, as I like to say, are more user-friendly. You could have thought, well, God had several independent lineages and they were all moving in certain preordained directions, which pleased his sense of how a uniform and harmonious world ought to be put together. And Darwin says, no, it's just history all coming with descent, with modification from a single common ancestry.
The key to Darwin's thought in every realm is that given enough time and innumerable small events, anything can take place by the laws of nature. So whether it's the raising of mountains or the evolution of new species, all of these things happen through time and change.
The rainforest holds striking examples.
Take a look at this mantis here. This thing is almost perfectly disguised as a leaf. I mean, but you can see, if you look at the underside, that it's a praying mantis just like you'd find in a garden in North America. But this one is highly modified. Its thorax is flattened out to look like a leaf, and its wings are modified to look like leaves. You can even see the veins. If you imagined a population of mantises and some looked more like leaves than others, those ones that look like leaves may tend to survive and reproduce more than others. And so a series of modifications could build up over time to result in an almost perfectly leaf-like mantis. But if you put it on a background, on which it doesn't belong, I mean, it just sticks out like a sore thumb, and it would almost certainly, where are you going there, pal? It would almost certainly get eaten by something.
Before heading into the mountains, Smith collects more birds to add to what he's learned in the rainforest.
Bill length.
How different will the highland birds prove to be?
9.2. Coleman is 10.
Different enough to be considered new species?
Bose Coleman.
Branching off in a new direction on the tree of life?
Hummingbirds are amazing. It turns out that they can drop their body temperature 50 degrees and go into a state of hibernation to withstand the frigid nights here. You can imagine a small-billed hummingbird living in cloud forests some 1,000 meters downslope from us. And if those individuals were to expand their range up into this habitat, where perhaps flowers are much longer, you could expect that individuals with slightly longer bills might survive better. And in fact, there are many examples in hummingbirds where we know that small changes in bill length can make important differences in how that bird extracts nectar and how well it survives. We're seeing that changes in the environment.
منظور در واقع اون سازنده تو نظریه با استناد به نظریه داروین اینه که چون شیپوری اون گلها عمیق‌تر بوده، در تکاملش این پرنده مجبور شده منقارش رو در طول گذر زمان بلندتر کنه. همون که میگن اونجا مثلا تو نظریه رد شده تو نظریه داروین، اینکه زرافه به خاطر اینکه مجبور بوده گردنش رو دراز کنه تا از درخت‌ها استفاده کنه، قسمت‌های پایین درخت‌ها رو می‌خوردن، بعد که میمونده قسمت بالای درخت‌ها، هی که گردنشون رو می‌کشیدن تو نسل‌های بعدی که قسمت‌های بالای درخت‌ها رو بتونن استفاده کنن، به این خاطر مثلا گردنشون دراز شده. یا این انطباقی که در نسبت بین سرما و گرما بود، این پایه نظریه داروینه که در انطباق با شرایط برای بقاست که جانوران متفاوت شدن و هر کدوم از اینا یه شکلی گرفتن. بعدن از این استفاده میکنه، از این فرضیه که بگه انسان هم در انطباق با شرایط بوده که بدنش اینجوری شده. قبلا به 4 دست پا میرفته، بعد آرام آرام رو 2 پا ایستاده و با توجه به زمینه بقایش بوده که این اتفاق افتاده. ایولوشن یا مسامحتاً کلمه تکامل با این نگاه میاد. اگر اون شیپوری گیاه کوچیک‌تر بود، نوک اون به اصطلاح منقار اون مرغ مگسخوار کوتاه‌تر میشد و چون حالا اون گیاه متفاوت بوده، این مجبور بوده خودش رو وفق بده. این وفق دادن در مسئله بقا پایه نظریه فرضیه داروین محسوب میشه.
But occasional mistakes in copying, mutations, can result in new traits.
By comparing DNA, we can determine who's most closely related to whom. We can determine when they had a common ancestor, when they diverged from that common ancestor.
Laboratory analysis reveals that DNA from the rainforest hummingbirds differs only very slightly from that of the highland hummingbirds. They must have diverged from a common ancestor relatively recently in the history of life on Earth, about 3 million years ago.
We're examining the genetic material that makes organisms what they are. And written in that DNA is the history of their evolution.
The fact that the blueprints for all living things are in the same language, the genetic code of DNA, is powerful evidence that they all evolved in a single tree of life.
How is it that organisms that are so different can be related? That we are related to a flatworm or a bacteria. Darwin emphasized that small changes would accrue every generation, and these changes could build up to amount to enormous changes. It's not really hard to understand how major transitions could come about given that life has been around for 3.5 billion years. Darwin really had it right.
Cabbage, sprout, cauliflower, all bred from the same ancestor. Cabbage, the leaves, sprouts, the side buds, cauliflower, the flower head, all monstrously enlarged.
Sitting opposite me is that strange creature, Homo thesis. Half man, half theory. A word of advice. In my entire life, I have known only 3 women who were skeptics, and 2 of them were not permitted in polite society. Keep your theory from Emma. It's too late.
I told her. Well, sort of. Not a theory. I don't have a theory. Just thoughts.
How did she take it?
She asked me to read her favourite part of the New Testament. Our Saviour's farewell to his disciples.
You see what I mean?
I am the vine, and ye are the branches. If man abide not in me...
Wilberforce's ears have pricked up.
If man abide not in me, he is cast forth as a branch, and is withered. And men shall gather them, and they shall be cast into the fire, and they are burned.
And how is your soul?
What?
Your fish.
Delicious.
I understand your carriage was stoned on the way here tonight.
Well,
we're meeting the threat on the streets head on.
Oh, yes.
We're drilling with the Honourable Artillery Company.
Gentlemen volunteers.
In the event of riots, we will back the police.
Every man, as long as he obeys the law of the land, should be free to pursue his own interest in his own way.
Yes, of course.
Charge what he likes for bread or anything else for that matter. Laissez-faire. Let individuals compete and struggle for their advantages. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Whenever I can't sleep, I reach for Malthus. Or as I prefer to think of him, the Reverend T.R. Morpheus. Still warm. 2 brandies.
Yes, sir.
The natural tendency of mankind is to reproduce. Humans can double their numbers every 25 years.
But they don't. A struggle for resources slows growth, and death and disease, war and famine check the population. I know the argument.
Yes, but don't you see exactly the same struggle takes place throughout nature? I don't know why I didn't make the connection before. Why are we not overrun with insects and frogs? Well, given the rate at which they reproduce, the number of eggs produced by each and every female.
Nature's broom sweeps away the ugly ducklings, the runts.
Yes, but it's not that simple. It's not that simple. Sometimes it's the ugly ducklings that are better adapted to the situations of life. They have longer legs and can run faster. They have bigger beaks that can crack harder nuts and seeds in harsh winters. They survive, have more offspring. Nature selects them to pass on their traits to future generations.
And where do we fit in?
Well, the sun does not revolve around the earth. Nature does not revolve around man. Man must fall into nature's cauldron. He's no deity, no exception. Once you accept that species can pass into one another, the whole fabric totters and falls.
They'll burn you at the stake for this.
Yes.
But now you have a theory. So I said, don't come down the ladder, Mother. I've taken it away. Good evening.
Darwin's work began with the observation that individuals differ from each other. And these minute differences, Darwin believed, might be advantageous. It might give each individual an edge when it came to getting food or finding a place to survive in nature.
Darwin realized that in nature, individual organisms compete for limited resources. Those with some kind of advantage, in coloration, for example, or in speed, or in vision, are more likely to survive and reproduce, and pass on these advantages to their offspring. Those who are less fit will not succeed. Darwin called it natural selection, because the forces of nature select which organisms will survive.
The survivors will be those whose variation fortuitously adapts them better to changing local environments. And then because they pass on those traits to their offspring, the population changes. That's natural selection. That's all it is. It's not a principle of progress. It's just a principle of local adaptation. You don't make better creatures in any cosmic sense. You make creatures that are better suited to the changing climates of their local habitats. That's it.
Darwin couldn't actually see natural selection acting in real time. But today, scientists can, by observing the evolution of HIV, the virus that causes AIDS.
Come on. Your sloth awaits you, sir.
What a magnificent piece. Hey, Raz?
My word. Owen's done a remarkable job.
He really is a splendid specimen. Yes, I thought you'd be pleased. Come through. See what I've been working on. The chimpanzee, being the highest organized four-handed ape, every difference between its anatomy and a human's is instructive.
I've been
For example, the irrational ape has dog-like canines, used as weapons of destruction, quite unlike the masters of the animal kingdom.
Yes, though...
And the human foot is of decisive taxonomic value. Our feet are made for walking upon, our hands for grasping. This brute has its hands and feet made to answer nearly the same purpose.
Well, there's a striking similarity between
I'm writing a
the
book on the
hands and
subject.
My brother is working on a new book, too.
Come here, let me show you what I mean.
All the same pattern. The bone structure in the hands and feet are all nearly identical.
The blueprint, if you will, that existed first in the Creator's mind.
Of that, there can be no doubt.
Utter tosh. The similarity of structure indicates one thing and one thing only. An ancient common ancestor. Real flesh and blood parents.
Why didn't you say so then? You must publish your ideas, if only to establish your priority. What's holding you back?
What is it?
I've completed a sketch of my species theory. I believe it's a considerable step in science. If anything should happen to me,
What do you mean?
if I should die,
Die, Charles, for goodness sake.
please, my love, it's important. If anything should happen to me, I'd like you to see to it that it gets published. £400 should be enough to see it printed and promoted.
Nothing's going to happen to you.
You say here that the human eye may possibly have been acquired by gradual selection of slight, but in each case useful deviations.
Yes?
That's a very great assumption, Charles.
Well, if I'm wrong about that, I'm wrong about everything. My entire theory's in ruins.
Can your theory account for the way my eyes and ears and hands and heart combine to reproduce the sounds that Chopin heard in his head? Isn't that a God-given gift?
Well, it's given, but not, I think, by God.
You're a man of science. You don't want to believe anything until it's proved. But some things are beyond proof. It would be a nightmare to me if I thought we didn't belong to each other forever in heaven.
Emma was a sincere believer in the Christian plan of salvation, and that those who trusted in Jesus and his resurrection from the dead would spend eternity in heaven. She saw that her husband's speculations about the origins of species and of humanity would jeopardize the Christian plan of salvation. God was being made remote in her husband's universe. Now, if nature by itself, unaided by God, could make an eye, then what else couldn't nature do? Nature could do anything. It could make everything.
In Darwin's day, the very existence of an organ of extreme perfection like the eye was taken by many as proof of God, as proof of a designer. How else could all of the intricate organs and substructures of the eye have come together in just the right way to make vision so possible and so perfect? But it turns out the eye isn't exactly perfect after all. In fact, the eye contains profound optical imperfections, and those imperfections are proof, in a sense, of the evolutionary ancestry of the eye.
Eyes are imperfect because evolution does not create things the way a designer or an artist does. Natural selection simply favors random changes that make an organism more fit to survive. And imperfections in design often result from evolution's constant tinkering. One such imperfection proved traumatic for artist Valerie Young.
We had just come home from a party, and I saw a lot of lights flashing inside my eye, especially on the outside edge of the right eye. And I thought we may be in trouble here. And it took me a while to really see that this was coming from inside my eye. Luckily, my husband was with me because I wouldn't have been able to drive to the hospital. So my vision was pretty obscured. The only way I can describe it is like a jellyfish with lots of little bubbles in it, and it just kept turning and floating in front of my eyes.
Valerie had a retinal tear, not an uncommon problem due to the way human eyes evolved from light-sensing patches of brain tissue in our ancient ancestors. In the human embryo, eyes develop from bulges in the brain's neural tube that pinch in to form cavities. This top layer, the retina, which tore in Valerie Young's eye, contains cells that collect light. It rests against a second, darker layer that lines the back of the eye, but the two layers are not attached to one another. And when the jelly that fills the eye liquefies as we age, it can cause the retina to tear. The jelly can then seep into the space underneath, leading to a retinal detachment and, in some cases, blindness.
When Valerie Young came in, her floaters were an immediate clue that she could have a retinal tear. We were able to successfully apply laser treatment in the office that day to seal it off, like applying sandbags around something, to wall it off so that the vitreous jelly would not get in the break and detach her retina.
Valerie Young's retinal tear is just one example of imperfections in the design of human eyes. Another occurs because nerve cells and blood vessels evolved to lie in front of the retina, where they interfere with its ability to form sharp images. It's like trying to take a picture through a foggy piece of glass. And the optic nerve itself evolved to connect to the brain through a hole in the retina. So the eyes of all vertebrates have a small blind spot, right near the middle of the visual field.
Evolution starts with what's already there, tinkers with it and modifies it, but can never do a grand redesign. So even the eye, with all of its optical perfection, has clues to the fact that its origin is of the blind process of natural selection.
Darwin believed that what he called an organ of extreme complexity, like the eye, could evolve by small steps, given enough time. Any trait that improved vision would aid in the search for food, or a mate, or in the avoidance of predators. So natural selection would most certainly favor those traits.
And what Darwin was able to do was to point out that you might think in logic that it's difficult to imagine a set of intermediary stages between the simplest little spot of nerve cells that can perceive light to a lens-forming eye that makes complex images. But in fact, these intermediary forms do exist in nature.
At the University of Lund in Sweden, zoologist Dan Erik Nielsen has developed models to show how a primitive eye spot could evolve through intermediate stages to become a complex human-like eye in less than 500,000 years.
Yeah, I've been interested in eye evolution for a long time. And in particular, I've been interested in the question of how long time it would take for an eye to evolve.
Nielsen envisioned a sequence of stages by which a flat patch of light-sensitive cells on an animal's skin could evolve into a camera-type eye. As a first step, nature would favor any changes that made the flat patch more cup-like.
As soon as you've created even the slightest depression in the center, it means that the edges of the cup will actually shade light from parts of the environment. And of course, all the light-sensitive cells in this little cup, they won't measure light in exactly the same direction. So already this cup has some pictorial information.
Another model demonstrates what a primitive cup eye can do. The brightly lighted skulls cast an image onto a translucent screen Nielsen installs at the back of the cup to act like a retina. But the image is not at all well defined. The cup eye can do little more than detect movement. This kind of eye can be found in nature today, in flatworms. Their eyes evolved no further. In their environment, that's all they needed.
But if the animals need to move faster or evolve to become fast predators or to see other fast predators, then the construction needs to be improved. And one way of doing that is to constrict the opening, to make it smaller.
That's just what happened to creatures like the chambered nautilus. Over thousands of generations, natural selection favored those with slightly more constricted eye openings, which focus light more sharply. This worked well, up to a point.
Since this strategy of making a sharp image also has the drawback of creating a very dim image, it's not very popular in the animal kingdom. And there is an alternative solution, which has become very popular in the animal kingdom, the solution that we use in our own eyes, and that is to put in a lens.
Nielsen's model lens uses 2 thin layers of clear plastic. He can inject water in between them to make the plastic windows bulge out like a convex lens. This mimics what natural selection might have done over a few 100,000 generations, favoring animals with a rounded, transparent layer in their eyes that cause light to be focused more sharply on the retina.
So we can make it gradually from no lens at all and just continue to inject more water, making the lenses bulge more and more, and the image becomes gradually sharper and sharper. So we can go all the way gradually in very small steps from a simple pigment cup eye, which has barely got the ability to determine the direction of a light source, all the way to a complete camera type eye of the same type as we have ourselves. And that is really exactly the way eye evolution must proceed.
The extreme complexity of the eye left Darwin in a cold sweat, he wrote to a friend. But still, he was convinced that an eye could be formed by natural selection. He later wrote that eyes must have evolved by numerous gradations from an imperfect and simple eye to one perfect and complex, with each grade being useful to its possessor. Nature, unaided by a designer, could produce an organ of seemingly miraculous complexity.
grant us strength.
Please, Charles. Please. Come along, children.
What Annie's death did to Darwin's faith was mainly to destroy Christianity. He could no longer see that a good God ordered and superintended all of the events of human life and of the universe. And he believed that she did not deserve punishment by God or by nature either. She had simply fallen victim to the struggle for existence, the amoral, purposeless struggle that ran according to laws of nature.
Darwin certainly didn't think that evolution spoke either for or against the unprovable existence of God or a form of God. He didn't desire to cast disparagement on anyone's religious convictions. He regarded it as a private matter which he was never able to hold with conventional zeal following the tragedy of his life.
Today, scientists hold all conceivable views on religion, from atheism to agnosticism to a general spirituality. And many, like biologist Ken Miller, adhere to very traditional beliefs.
I'm an Orthodox Catholic, and I'm an Orthodox Darwinist. My idea of God is a supreme being who acts in concert with the principles and the ideas that Darwin explained to us about the origin of species. My students often ask me, you say you believe in God. Well, what kind of God? Is it a fashionable New Age God, a pyramid power kind of God? Do you think, like some scientists do, that God is the sum total of the laws of physics? And I shake those off and say that my religious belief is entirely conventional.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom.
It surprises students very often that anyone could say that that kind of very traditional, conventional religious belief could be compatible with evolution. But it is.
The peace and unity of your kingdom where you live forever and ever. Amen.
I find this absolutely wonderful consistency with what I understand about the universe from science and what I understand about the universe from faith.
Tennessee's premier morning radio talk show, the Halloran Hilton Hill Morning Show on News Talk 99, WNOX AM/FM, Loudon, Knoxville.
12 past the hour of 6 o'clock. It's my pleasure to welcome to the broadcast this morning Dr. Kenneth Miller. He's a professor of biology at Brown University. His book is entitled Finding Darwin's God, a scientist's search for common ground between God and evolution. He's in town tonight. Let me ask you this. As a cellular biologist, when in your experience are you studying something or reading something or doing some research, when do you come to the point where you go, that's God?
As an experimental scientist, I don't find God in the insufficiency of science to explain things. In other words, I don't find God in ignorance. I don't find God because we say, well, we can't explain that. That must be something that God's doing.
But what did God do? Did he just create some kind of primordial soup and say, go?
Well, a long time ago, people were sufficiently unknowing of how things worked in the natural world to see when the sun moved across the sky, they imagined that God had to push that sun across the sky. And gradually, we began to realize that the world works according to physical laws. Science investigated those laws. So what room is there for God in present-day life? Well, I think if you ask people who are believers, how does God act? They would say he acts in a variety of ways. He answers our prayers. He inspires us. No doubt there are events that take place that are part of what some people might call God's plan. And what I would suggest is if you look back in Earth's history, if God is working today in concert with the laws of nature, with physical laws and so forth, he probably worked in concert with them in the past. In a sense, he's the guy who made up the rules of the game, and he manages to act within those rules.
For Miller and millions of followers of all major religions, notions of God and evolution are fully compatible. But not everyone agrees.
When we replace the traditional idea of God, the creator, with the idea of the process of natural selection doing the creating, the creation is as wonderful as it ever was. All that great design work had to be done. It just wasn't done by an individual. It was done by this huge process distributed over billions of years.
God created man in his image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them.
Whereas people used to think of meaning coming from on high and being ordained from the top down. Now we have Darwin saying, no, all of this design can happen, all of this purpose can emerge from the bottom up without any direction at all. And that's a very unsettling thought for many people.
In Darwin's day, science and politics and religion were all of a piece when you talked about the origins of life and of species. Astronomy could go along pretty well because it testified to the wisdom and power of God in holding the planets in place. But the idea of evolution or transmutation, people said with a snarl, put in jeopardy the whole established social order.
What is in this big book of his, do you think?
Transmutation.
Another Darwin blotting God out of creation.
We want to support your scheme for a museum of natural history.
Some people see it as rash, extravagant, grandiose.
If it's grand, it's because it should house as wide a display as possible.
But we need your help in return. It is up to you, as the country's leading anatomist and paleontologist, to prove man's superiority.
We won't have street ruffians tout man's monkey origin in Her Majesty's museums.
You can rely on me, Bishop Wilberforce. The human brain differs markedly from that of all other mammals. In man, not only do the cerebral hemispheres overlap the olfactory lobes and the cerebellum, but they extend in advance of the one and farther back than the other. Their posterior development is so marked that I have assigned to that part the character of a third lobe, peculiar to Homo sapiens, the hippocampus minor. Peculiar mental faculties are associated with this highest form of brain, and I am led, therefore, to regard man not merely as representative of a distinct subclass, but as the inhabitant of one reserved for him alone. The human brain is in itself proof of man's moral and religious faculties. Such are the powers with which we, and we alone, are gifted.
I wonder what a chimpanzee would have to say about that, Mr. Huxley.
I think it's priceless. His theory is a house built on sand, a Corinthian portico on cow dung.
Yes.
Damn all the sanctimonious meddlers who try and stifle troublesome research. The ultimate court of appeal of science is observation and experiment, not authority, wealth, and rank.
Your disagreements with Owen should not be personal.
I can't help it. He's so pompous. The prospect of his slipping on one of his pickled brains is just too good to be true.
Bad feeling will only cloud the issue and lead to bad science.
Tell that to Owen.
Huxley's saying in public what you think in private. Charles, you've stalled long enough. You've collected enough barnacles to sink a ship of the line. Meanwhile, you're being upstaged.
That's not important. My book is the thing. Once my work is done...
Will it deal with man?
It's too surrounded by prejudices.
Well, whether it does or it doesn't, you must publish.
Oh, my God. Raz.
What is it? Who is Alfred Wallace?
My dear Huxley. It's like a précis of my theory. All my originality, whatever it's worth, has been smashed. Had Wallace a copy of the essay I'd written in '44 in front of him, he couldn't have written a better short abstract. Variations being pushed further and further from parent species by a struggle for existence, overpopulation. It's all there.
Is your book ready for publication?
Publish? How can I publish honourably? I'd sooner burn the blasted thing than have him or anyone else think that I behaved in a paltry spirit.
Then publish a joint paper, excerpts from your work along with Wallace's essay. And then you must prepare a manuscript for publication. Who knows, it may all be for the best. At last we'll finally get to learn your views in full.
This book will be the death of me. What a miserable wretch I'd be without you near me.
When on board HMS Beagle as naturalist, I was much struck with certain facts in the distribution of the organic beings inhabiting South America, and in the geological relations of the present to the past inhabitants of that continent. These facts seem to throw some light on the origin of species. That mystery of mysteries.
The Times is very positive.
I should think so. It's Huxley. The Athenaeum wants me tried in the Divinity Hall, the college, the lecture room and museum. My book is no more unorthodox than the subject demands. I don't discuss the origins of man. I don't discuss Genesis.
Charles, don't be so naive. It's clear you think man is no exception. Whether you're right or wrong, you must finish what you started.
Darwin! Darwin!
Ah, Owen! How dare you? How dare you paint me as reactionary?
I didn't paint you as
reactionary.
reactionary.
How dare you put my name with the defenders of immutability? Is my concept of the ordained continuous becoming of living things to be ignored?
But what does it mean? I don't know what it means. It means animals appearing out of thin air.
Not at all. Oh, you believe that selection is the only possible creative law. Pure chance, the roll of the dice. In fact, new species are created by natural birth according to God's law.
Well, I don't believe...
I know this put you up to this. Huxley!
Please, Richard.
Well, I will have absolutely no truck with the Huxleys of this world, and nor should you. It is an abuse of science. You should be ashamed of yourself. Your book is a snub to the clergy and an insult to humanity. It's nihilism. Only a man devoid of a soul could find solace in a bestial ancestry.
It's as respectable to be modified monkey as modified dirt.
Huxley, please.
No, I think it's splendid. Old ladies of both sexes say it's a dangerous book. Splendid. Don't worry. I'll deal with him. I'm sharpening my beak and claws in readiness.
Any contribution to our natural history from the pen of Mr. Charles Darwin is certain to command attention. His latest publication, The Origin of Species, is manifestly regarded by him as the opus upon which his future fame is to rest. Mr. Darwin claims that every living thing, every fish, plant, fungus, fly, elephant, man, turnip, are all equally the lineal descendants of the same common ancestor. Such a notion is absolutely incompatible with the Word of God. Man was made in the image of God and redeemed by the eternal Son. Natural selection is an ingenious theory for denying the working and therefore the existence of the Creator. In fact, the human brain differs markedly from that of all other mammals.
Unfortunately, my Lord Bishop, you have been misinformed. If we are unprejudiced judges, we have to admit that there is as little interval as animals between the gorilla and the man as there is between the gorilla and the baboon. It is speech alone and not some spiritual gift that makes man a reasonable being. That is the source of our unlimited intellectual progress, but that does not disguise the fact that to the very root and foundation of his nature, man is one with the rest of the organic world. No one who has ever dissected the brain of an ape agrees with Professor Owen. His findings are wrong. I can only assume that Professor Owen's brain must have shrunk in the pickling jar. I meant, of course, the chimpanzee's brains he had examined.
Oh, Lord.
It was then that God delivered Wilberforce into my hands.
I wonder, Mr. Huxley, is it through your grandfather or your grandmother that you claim descent from an ape?
I stood up, very quiet, very grave, and said my say with perfect good temper.
If the question is put to me, would I rather have a miserable ape for a grandfather or a man, highly intelligent, possessed of great means of influence, and yet who employed these faculties and that influence for the mere purpose of introducing ridicule into a grave scientific discussion? I unhesitatingly affirm my preference for the ape.
You didn't. I said that, or something very like that.
How dare you attack a live bishop in public? Have you no respect for the purple waistcoat?
Lady Brewster fainted, had to be carried from the room. And then Admiral Fitzroy got to his feet.
Fitzroy?
Believe in this! Believe in God, not man!
Oh my.
We'll probably never know the truth.
Well, the truth, Charles, is in your book. It's the most interesting thing I've ever read. The reasoning is so entirely satisfactory to me that if the facts don't fit, then, well, so much the worse for the facts. The sheikhs. Time I was naturally selected.
For more than a century, people have often thought that the conclusion to draw from Darwin's vision is that Homo sapiens, our species, that we're just animals too, we're just mammals, that there is nothing morally special about us. I myself don't think this follows at all from Darwin's vision, but it is certainly the received view in many quarters.
Ever since The Origin of Species was published, strict believers in biblical creation have attacked Darwin's vision. Their concerns aren't only about the science of evolution. At stake, many believe, is nothing less than the human soul.
To suggest that animals and plants and us, humans, came into being in a natural law-like way, in the way the planets move, was to put in jeopardy the human soul. And the human soul is the crux of the matter. Because if we are not different from animals, if we don't live forever in heaven or in hell, then why should we behave other than like animals in this life?
In the 19th century, in Darwin's time, it was audacious to claim that humans and chimps were closely related. There wasn't that much scientific evidence. But since that time, the evidence has become strong. First, we saw the fossil record appear. Evidence of human ancestors that had ape-like features established the plausibility of the idea that humans and chimps had common ancestors. And then in the last 20 years, we've seen the emergence of a whole new type of data that's established the close relationship between chimps and humans. And that comes from the analysis of DNA. This is DNA. We've got DNA, chimps have got DNA, bacteria have got DNA, petunias have got DNA, crabs have got DNA. Every living animal, plant, fish, frog has got DNA. And if we compare the DNAs of any two species, we can establish how closely related they are one to another.
In the early days of DNA research, a double strand of DNA was extracted from each species to be compared. When heated, the strands split apart. When the single strands from each creature were put together and allowed to cool, the two always combined to form the familiar double helix. The degree to which the strands mated successfully was a measure of their similarity. It turned out that human DNA and chimp DNA combined almost perfectly. Today, this similarity can be seen even more precisely. DNA sequences can now be read, letter by letter.
Here we're looking at the DNA sequences of one particular gene as found in human and chimp. And what's immediately evident is that humans and chimps have DNAs that are 98% identical. They're basically the same. They're just a couple of spelling changes. Why are there only a couple of spelling changes? Because we and chimps had a common ancestor only a few million years ago. And these few spelling differences have accumulated during the propagation of this DNA during those few million years. If more time had passed since we had our last common ancestor, more spelling changes would have accumulated.
If the same gene from a rat is compared, many more spelling differences are seen.
That's because our common ancestor with the rat lived about 80 or 100 million years ago, and there's been much more time for spelling differences to accumulate.
Chimpanzees and humans are made from blueprints that are 98% the same. But what about the ways humans and chimps think and act in the world? Are there similarities there as well?
Boy, doing some pull-ups. Oh, be careful.
Psychologist Sally Boysen explores the commonalities between the minds of chimps and humans. A quest that may help explain how the human mind evolved.
The developmental milestones really throughout the life of a chimp are almost exactly the same as humans. Everything is so similar. They respond to new things and new toys, and they have the same kinds of rough and tumble play. Harper's rough and rowdy and runs all over the place and climbs, and Emma really can almost entertain herself. One of the things that our work allows us to see is that chimpanzees can acquire very sophisticated, complex cognitive skills, like learning to count, which they normally wouldn't learn in the wild.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Ooh.
Yet, they have the requisite neural capacity to do that. Where did that come from?
Okay, Sheep, we're gonna do another turn now. Here we go. One of those. Ooh, and a malted milk ball. Can you tell me the answer to this with the blue and the brown? Show me, yeah. Go ahead. Excellent.
There's almost nothing that the chimps haven't been able to learn that we've tried to teach them. We've seen their ability to grasp extremely complex notions, like the concept of zero, for example.
Okay, Sheep, look, what if I didn't put any candy here at all? What would you say? 0. That's right. There's no candy here. Oh, that's too bad, isn't it?
There's no way the chimps would be able to do this if they didn't have a great deal of commonality in literally the neurological structure that supports their ability to learn, just like we do. Those things are absolutely comparable and had to come from a common ancestor.
The similarities that we have with our primate relatives are extraordinary. We share so much of our DNA, we share so much of our morphology, we even share our blood types. But for all of those similarities, there are striking differences. I think the reason for this is really very simple, and that is the line of evolution that led to us led, for reasons which we're only beginning to understand, to an explosive development of mental capacity. And what clearly happened is that natural selection favored the evolution of organisms that could communicate, that could manipulate symbols, and could construct language. Darwin's great idea is a grand and marvelous explanation that shows us that we are united with every other form of life on this planet. And I find that an exciting and maybe even an ennobling way to look at things.
Darwin died in April 1882 at the age of 73. The family thought he would be buried in the parish churchyard. Darwin had said months before he died that he would have to look forward to it as the sweetest place on earth. It was not to be. In London, Darwin's friends determined to make his death and burial a state occasion. They went to the Royal Society and they got signatures. They went to the House of Commons and got up a petition. They telegraphed the Dean of Westminster, who was abroad, and got his approval. A special anthem was even written for the occasion. And on the 26th of April, a week after the death, Darwin's body was borne mightily in procession down the aisle of Westminster Abbey to be interred in the shadow of the grave of Sir Isaac Newton. Darwin's interment celebrated the vast social transformation that England was undergoing. There were new colonies, new industries, and new men to run them. Darwin's body was enshrined to the greater glory of these new professionals, for he had naturalized creation and delivered human nature and human destiny into their hands. Society would never be the same. Darwin's vision of nature was, I believe, fundamentally a religious vision, one with which he ended his most famous work on the origin of species. There is grandeur in this view of life, with its several powers having been originally breathed into a few forms or into one, and that whilst this planet has gone cycling on according to the fixed law of gravity, from so simple a beginning, endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful, have been and are being evolved.
پایه نگاه به انسان امروز، ایدئولوژی نگاه به انسان امروز اینه. محورهای اصلی اینه: یک، مبانی این فلسفه فیلاسوفی آف آنتروپوس هست، فلسفه آنتروپولوژی، نگاه به انسان. در نگاه به انسان پرسش اینه که انسان چیست، نه اینکه انسان کیست. نکته دوم. مسئله دوم، تمایز بین اینه که ایدئولوژی اول رو بپذیریم، یعنی خلقت، یا ایدئولوژی دوم، یا تکامل و ایولوشن در حوزه مادی. انسان تصادفی به وجود اومده، تصادفی در فرایند چرخه طبیعی خود طبیعت، گیاهان و جانوران آرام آرام از انسان یک موجود امروزی ساخته شده. همونطوری که گردن زرافه بلند شده، همون که نوک منقار یک پرنده‌ای به خاطر اون استفاده که می‌خواسته از شیره گیاهان ببره بلند شده، به همون نسبت هم انسان تکامل جسمی پیدا کرده و تکامل مادی. خیلی نظریه ساده است، اما چون در عین سادگی حیرت انگیز پارادایم ایجاد کرد که بشر غربی تو این پارادایم افتاد، نتونسته از این پارادایم بیاد بیرون. لذا مبنای همه نظریه‌های علوم انسانی، نظریه‌های علوم پایه و سایر گزاره‌ها شده. تقابلی که در خود غرب بین این دوتا پارادایم وجود داره در کتاب‌های متعددی دیده شده. نمونه این کتاب‌ها رو که تعدادش هم بسیار زیاده، فقط یکی دو نمونه اصلی رو ببینید. در نمونه اول با توجه به تلقی داروین، پرسشی که توی جلد کتاب می‌بینید آمده اینه: چطور میشه هم یک در واقع مسیحی بود، یعنی هم اعتقاد مسیحی داشت، هم به اِوولوشن و نظریه داروین معتقد بود. یعنی جمع بین مسیحیت و نظریه داروین اینقدر براشون مسئله است که مجبورن بیان این دوتا پارادایم رو که چجوری میشه با هم یکی کرد رو در قالب کتاب مطرح میکنن و بهش میپردازن. یا در کتاب دوم آمده بین ایولوشن و بین خلقت این نسبت متوازنش رو بررسی کرده. این دو تا ایدئولوژی دیگه، یک ایدئولوژی داروینیزمه که نظریه فرضیه تکامل رو ارائه کرده، یک نظریه هم نظریه خلقته. در ایدئولوژی خلقت حتی خلقت رو هم ایدئولوژی گرفتن که عرض کردم که اینا در حوزه سیاستگذاری‌های علمیشون معتقدن که این علم نیست. مفهوم خلقت یک مفهومیه که در مقابل ایولوشن در بخش طبیعت قرار داده شده. مشابه این کتاب‌ها بسیار بسیار تعدادش زیاده و اینها این تقابل رو سعی کردن مورد ارزیابی قرار بدن. ما در طرح نفخه آنچه که مدرنیسم رو متمایز میکنه از نگاه اسلام در بخش فلسفه آنتروپوس تبیین این دوتا نگاه است. یعنی یکی نگاه خلقتگرا، یکی هم ایدئولوژی داروینیزمه. خروجی ایدئولوژی داروینیزم به مفهومی منتج شده به نام فیزیولوژی. آنچه که شما به عنوان دانشجوی پزشکی 3 واحد مجبورید بخونید اسمش فیزیولوژی. نتیجه طبیعی نگاه به انسان از حیث چیزی که انسان چیست، خروجیش میشه فیزیولوژی. یعنی فیزیک بدن انسان رو مورد ارزیابی و مطالعه قرار دادن. ما رد نمی کنیم اثرات مثبت دانش فیزیولوژی رو، اما واقعا بدن انسان، فیزیک انسان و همه حیات انسان به بعد فیزیولوژیکشه. آیا انسان نیازی به شناخت دیگه از خودش نداره؟ طبیعتاً وقتی از آنتروپولوژی شروع کنیم نتیجه طبیعی اینه که ما به فیزیولوژی میرسیم. اون چیزی که در مدرنیسم رودمپ نامیده میشه، یعنی نقشه راه نامیده میشه، از مبانی نظری انتزاعی تا اینکه آرام آرام به تعین علمی میرسه که فیزیولوژی رو رقم میزنه، یک همچین چرخه‌ای داره. شما برای طرح‌ریزی استراتژیک در نظام‌های تمدنی و تمدن‌سازی از مبانی نظری اینگونه باید آغاز کنید. یک پزشک ما فیزیولوژی رو سر جای خودش ارزیابی میکنه. یک انسان شناس ما آنتروپولوژی رو در جامعه شناسی یه جای دیگه ارزیابی میکنه. کسانی که روند زیست شناسی رو مطالعه میکنن و علوم طبیعی رو، داروینیسم رو یه جای دیگه مطالعه میکنن. اما در کلان نگری و کلگرایی که بایستی در تفکر استراتژیک داشته باشید، باید بتوانید بر آنتروپولوژی مورد نظر در فلسفه جامعه شناسی و انسان شناسی، در داروینیسم در علوم طبیعی و سپس در فیزیولوژی در آنچه که پزشکی نامیده میشه، این 3 تا رو باید با همدیگه در یک رودمپ، در یک نقشه راه بچینید، از اون انتزاعیه یعنی از اون فلسفیه تا این دکترینه که حوزه فیزیولوژی هست، این 3 تا رو در یک چرخه طبیعی قرار بدید، بتونید نتیجه تمدنی بگیرید که چطور مبانی این تمدن شکل گرفته. با توجه به چنین مسئله‌ای، بنیان‌هایی که مبانی تمدن امروز جهان رو گذاشته و نگاه به انسان، نگاه به عالم رو چیزی گرفته، نه کسی، عالم رو کاملا در ماده تعریف کرده، نتیجه طبیعی این از یک چنین سازوکاری بهره منده. این تقابل یک بخشش که بخش داروینیزمه. داروینیزم حاکمه. بی برو برگرد. در گزارش CNN که اون خانم امانپور تهیه کرده، اونجا میبینید خانواده‌ای که 5-6 تا بچه داره، بچهش رو مدرسه نمیفرسته توی آمریکا. وقتی بهش میگن چرا، میپرسه ازش، میگه که داروینیزم مبنای تعلیم و تربیت توی آمریکا. در آمریکا اون خانم میدونه که داروینیزم مبنای تعلیم و تربیته، اما شما اصلا نمیدونید 12 سالی که توی مدارس ایران درس خوندید، یک کتاب بینش دینی داشتید، اما مبانی علوم طبیعی، علوم انسانی و سایر علومی که میخوندید تمامش داروینیستیک بوده. شما تقسیماتی که در دبیرستان میشناختید این بود: علوم انسانی، ریاضی، فنی که توی هنرستان بود و علوم تجربی، و نمیدانستید که پایه علوم تجربی نگاه داروینیزمه، علوم انسانیش هم داروینیستیه ها. امروز هم نمیدانید که کسانی که زیست شناسی میخونن، کسایی که زمین شناسی میخونن، کسایی که پزشکی میخونن، جامعه شناسی و روان شناسی میخونن، اقتصاد و سیاست میخونن، همه پارادایم علمیشون، جمله اولی که تو این فیلم بود که اشاره شد که این نظریه خطرناک همه علوم رو دگرگون کرد. همه علوم. نقشه علمی موجود جهان اگر بخواید پایش رو در ساینس مورد بررسی قرار بدید، پایش داروینیزم. داروینیزم اونجوری که ملاحظه فرمودید مبتنی است بر چرخه تاریخ طبیعت. تاریخ طبیعی رو مورد ارزیابی قرار میده، به اینجا میرسه. مگه اشکال داره؟ قوی ترین جریان تاریخ گرای قبل از این جریان هگل، هردر، ویکو در نگاه به تکوین ایده است. تاریخ ایدیاست. ایدئالیسم یا ایدئولوژی اصالت ایده که اون روح حاکم بر تاریخ، بهش میگفت هگل گایست، اون ذهن کلی بشری، یعنی نه یک ذهن همه بشر یک ذهنه و بشر در طول این ذهن مستمر و ممتد در بحث فنومنولوژی روح، پدیدارشناسی روح، در گایست، اون ذهن ممتد بشری، مایند، تکامل بشر اونجا تعریف میشد. اما با عبور از اندیشه هگلی در اندیشه داروین، این طبیعته که یک کلیتی داره. در نگاه هگل انسان هیچه، اون ذهن کلی همه چیزه و انسانها تک تک ذهنشون ذوب میشه در ذهن کلی. این مایندهای مختلف، این اسپریتهای مختلف، این روحهای مختلف در اون روح کلی حل میشه. این نگاه در تلقی داروینی، همه انسانها یه ماده دارن، یک پدیده مادی هستن، چیزی هستن، نه کسی، و این در اثر دگردیسی و اون چرخه تکامل یک ماده اولیه است. یه روز یه چیزی بوده، روز دیگه چیز دیگه شده. شاعرای خودمون هم تو نگاه مادیگراشون همینو دارن دیگه. عاقبت خاک گل کوزه‌گران خواهیم شد. کسی که این شعر انجیل رو می‌سراید نمیگه که عاقبت چه خواهیم بود و چه کسی هستیم در صحرای محشر. عاقبت خاک گل کوزه‌گران خواهیم شد، یعنی نگاه داروینیه دیگه. که البته ما قبل داروین بودن کسایی که این حرفا رو تو ادبیات ما میزدن. پس دو جریان پرقدرت 200 سال گذشته تاریخگرا یک بار تاریخ رو معنا میگیره، ایده میگیره، در ذهن میشه نگاه هگل. این جزءها، این انسانهای متعدد هیچ میشن. یک گایست، یک روح کلی که تاریخ رو میسازه. 3 جزء داشت: دترمینیزم، جبری نگری، جزء اصلیش بود. هیستوریسیزم، تاریخی گری. از جبری نگری، تاریخی نگری. اینجا همون جبری نگری و دترمینیزم هگلی موضوعیت داره. جبران ما جزئی از طبیعتیم و اجباراً یک روز چیزی هستیم و روز دیگه چیزی دیگه. یک روز انسان میمون بوده، امروز تبدیل شده به انسان، معلوم نیست فردا تبدیل بشه به چه چیزی. چندی قبل این بحث‌های آینده شناسی میگذارن، ذوق زده میشن تا تکنولوژی رشدی درش میکنه، فوری میان عالم رو تو اون دگردیسی میبینن. یک استاد علوم ارتباطات این ایولوشن رو اینجوری میگفت، این که میگم حاکم بر ایولوشن به نظریه داروین حاکم بر ذهن علمای خود ما. یک استادی آمده بود از اینایی که توی دانشگاه علم و صنعت و اینا روی نظریه‌های آینده شناسی از حیث اینکه حالا تکنولوژی به اینجا رسیده، گام بعد تکنولوژی میشه چی؟ این شد فیوچرولوژی، این شد آینده شناسی. میگفت در آینده همینطوری که توی این موبایل ها و غیره سیم کارت جا میخوره، توی این کامپیوترها یک کارت های گرافیکی قرار داده میشه، در آینده نچندان دور انسان به درجه از تکامل جسمی میرسه که اینجای کلش یک کارت مموری میخوره، بعد مثلا چند گیگابایت مثلا اطلاعات رو سریع طرف به سر خودش جا میده دیگه. به جای اینکه کامپیوتر با خودش حمل کنه، لپتاپ حمل کنه، اون فلش مموری و اون کارتای گرافیکی رو توی سر خودش جا میده و استفاده میکنه. در چنین فرایندی نگاهی که وجود داره چیه؟ نگاه انسان متدین مسیحی به 5 دسته تقسیم شده. یعنی انسان مسیحی برای اینکه با این مسئله مواجه صورت بده، اونا کریشنیزم رو به عنوان خلقت میگیرن. خلقت، جریان خلقتگرا در مقابل جریان طبیعتگرای داروینی، برای اینکه به این مسئله پاسخ بدن به 5 دسته تقسیم شدن. الان این 5 دسته تقابل میکنن، با اینها زورشون هم به هیچ جا نرسیده. دسته اولشون یعنی از این 5 گروه خلقت زمین جوان رو مبنا قرار میدن. این یک نظریه است. نظریه دوم روی خلقت شکاف بحث میکنه. گروه سوم حوزهشون به اصطلاح خلقت تدریجیه، یعنی تدریجی خلقت صورت گرفته. تمام اینا در واکنش به نظریه داروین ها، یعنی هر چی داروین بحث کرده اینا سعی کردن بیان بین نگاه مسیحیت و یهود با نگاه داروین جمع کنن، یا کاملا مخالفن و متباینن، یا نه در نسبت با اون به یک شکافی اعتقاد دارن، یا به خلقت تدریجی اعتقاد دارن که خلقت صورت گرفته در یک دوره زمانی آرام آرام، یعنی خدا خلق کرده ولی آرام آرام این تکامل در شکل گرفته. برخی در مکتب چهارمشون طرح هوشمند رو مطرح کردن، اینتلیجنت دیزاین، که اینجا نظرشون هوشمندی این طرح هست. گروه چهارم تکامل خدایی رو مبنا قرار دادن. هر 4 تا نگاه یعنی به 3-4 تا حوزه تقسیم میشه. حوزه هیومانیتی، ستون اول که انسان چه وضعیتی داشته توی مرحله، حوزه بعد حوزه به اصطلاح بیولوژیکال، حوزه سوم توی زمین چه نقشی، چه دگردیسی و تحولی به وجود اومده در اثر این موارد بعدی. آنچه که انسان متدین و انسان مسیحی سعی کرده در مواجهه با نظریه داروین ارائه کنه، یک تلاش تقریباً ضعیف به دلیل مبانی سست مسیحیت بوده. مبانی سست مسیحیت. اما خب پسندیده است. یعنی واقعا من ستایش میکنم ایمان اون انسان مسیحی رو که حاضر میشه در جامعه فوق پیشرفته آمریکا بچهش رو مدرسه نفرسته، خودش بنشینه توی خونش، برخلاف میلیون ها انسان ایرانی که هزاران و میلیون ها تومان هزینه میکنن در کلاس های کنکور تا بچهشون به زور هم که شده وارد این دانشگاه ها بشه و نمیدونن که باورسوزی و ایمانسوزی که توی این مدارس و دانشگاه ها با همین مبانی نظری صورت میگیره چه مصیبتی ایجاد میکنه. و من ستایش میکنم تلاش انسان مسیحی غربی رو در مواجهه با نظریه داروین، هرچند به نتیجه نرسیده که این معلول ضعف پایه و ضعف بنیادی نظریه های خود مسیحیت. طرح بحث ما در جلسه اول این بود که برای تربیت انسان و تأدیب انسان باید از شناخت انسان شروع کرد. در شناخت انسان آنتروپولوژی اگر شد انسان شناسی، مصیبت بشر از همینجا شروع شده. بشر آنتروپوس نیست. آنتروپوس و آنتروپولوژی یعنی این که این بشر چیست، ماده اولیش چیه. به طور طبیعی وقتی از ماده اولیه بشر شروع کردید، شما در دکترین میرسید به فیزیولوژی، آخرش میاد توی اتاق تشریع در جلسات پزشکی تیغ جراحی رو میگذارید، این چیستی انسان رو مورد آنالیز قرار میدید. فیزیولوژی اون اجزا، حد واسط این دوتا یعنی آنتروپولوژی در فلسفه و فیزیولوژی در دکترین، حد فاصل این دوتا میشه داروینیسم، اصالت نگاه داروین. نگاه داروین یک پایه کلی داره، معتقده که در چرخه طبیعت دگردیسی های طبیعی حاصل نیاز، همه چیز معلول نیاز. تاریخ طبیعت، همینطوری که زمین در دگردیسی های خودش در اثر این فعل و انفعالات تکتونیکی زیر زمین، آتشفشان ها، صخره های مرجانی و غیره، اینکه کره زمین چه تغییرات عینی داشته، پوسته زمین، ریخت شناسی زمین، قاره ها به هم نزدیک شدن، از هم دور شدن، کوه ها فرسوده شدن. همین حالت در مورد گیاهان هست و در مورد جانوران. انسان هم از این قاعده مستثنا نیست. کورتکس مغز انسان اگر کامل تر شده، قشای خاکستری اگر شکل جدی تری پیدا کرده، معلول همین تکامله. منکر تغییر و تحول طبیعی در گیاهان و جانوران و زمین شناسی و انسان نیستیم. ما اصلا اینو نفی نمی کنیم، اما این همه چیز نیست. عنایت داشته باشن دوستان، ما 0 و 100 نمی بینیم یا این یا آن. همه چیز نیست. اگر مبنا ایولوشن و به تعبیری تکامل قرار گرفت، چون کلمه تکامل که میگیم از یک نقصی و نقصانی به سمت یک کمال مطلوبی حرکت میکنه. آنچه که ایولوشن نامیده میشه نمیشه معنی کلمه تکامل رو برش اطلاق کرد، چون تکاملی نیست. یه نیازی هست برای انطباق با شرایط، برای بقا. اگر ماموت ها هم میتونستن عرق کنند، چون ماموت میدونید که چون هوا گرم شد کره زمین، ماموت ها نتونستن منطبق کنن خودشونو با شرایط، نابود شدن. اگر کسی نتونه خودش رو منطبق کنه با شرایط، نابود میشه. ایولوشن اینو میخواد بگه که هر پدیده‌ای در گزاره‌های زمین شناختی، در گزاره‌های طبیعی، جانور شناختی، گیاه شناسی و انسان شناسی، اگر توانست خودش رو با شرایط و محیط وفق بده، این انطباق به بقایش میانجامه. در غیر این صورت نابود میشه و اصطلاحاً منقرض. نگاه مسیحیت سعی کرده این روند رو بیاد با خلقت عجین کنه، پایه رو گرفته همین حرکت علمی چند میلیون ساله‌ای که میگن زمین چند میلیون سال این دگردیسی رو شکل داده، آرام آرام اومده جلو. هی دارن سعی میکنن خلقت رو یه جایی توی این رشد علمی براش ببینن، یعنی توی این تکوین علمی یه جایی برای این نظریه خلقتی که توی انجیل و تورات و بعضا قرآن آمده ببینن. و سلام.